this, I thought it was interesting and surprising, and it pushed me to consider what screens were doing to me and to my family and the people I loved and to people at large. And so for the last 5 years, as a professor of business and psychology, I've been studying the effect of screens on our lives. And I want to start by just focusing on how much time they take from us. And then we can talk about what that time looks like. So what I'm showing you here is the average 24-hour workday at 3 different points in history. 2007, 10 years ago, 2015, and then data that I collected actually only last week. And a lot of things haven't changed all that much. So we sleep roughly 7.5 to 8 hours a day. Some people say that's declined slightly, but it hasn't changed much. We work 8.5 to 9 hours a day. We engage in survival activities. These are things like eating and bathing and looking after kids, about 3 hours a day. And that leaves this white space. That's our personal time. That space is incredibly important to us. That's the space where we do things that make us individuals. That's where hobbies happen, where we have close relationships, where we really think about our lives, where we get creative, where we zoom back and try to work out whether our lives have been meaningful. And of course, we get some of that from work as well, but when people look back on their lives and they wonder what their lives have been like at the end of their lives, you look at the last things they say, they are talking about those moments that happen in that white personal space. So it's sacred. It's important to us. Now, what I'm going to do is show you how much of that space is taken up by screens across time. In 2007, this much. That was the year that Apple introduced the first iPhone. 8 years later, this much. Now, this much. That's how much time we spend of that free time in front of our screens. This yellow area, this thin sliver, is where the magic happens. That's where your humanity lives. And right now, it's in a very small box. So what do we do about this? Well, the first question is, what does that red space look like? Now, of course, screens are miraculous in a lot of ways. I live in New York. A lot of my family lives in Australia, and I have a 1-year-old son, and the way I've been able to introduce them to him is with screens. I couldn't have done that 15 or 20 years ago in quite the same way. So there's a lot of good that comes from them. And one thing you can do is you can ask yourself what goes on during that time. How enriching are the apps that we're using? And some are enriching. If you stop people while they're using them and say, tell us, how do you feel right now? They say they feel pretty good about these apps. Those that focus on relaxation, exercise, weather, reading, education, and health. They spend an average of 9 minutes a day on each of these. These apps make them much less happy. About half the people, when you interrupt them and say, how do you feel, say they don't feel good about using them. Now, what's interesting about these, dating, social networking, gaming, entertainment, news, web browsing, people spend 27 minutes a day on each of these. We're spending 3 times longer on the apps that don't make us happy. That doesn't seem very wise. Now, one of the reasons we spend so much time on these apps that make us unhappy is they rob us of stopping cues. Stopping cues were everywhere in the 20th century. They were baked into everything we did. A stopping cue is basically a signal that it's time to move on, to do something new, to do something different. And think about newspapers. Eventually you get to the end, you fold the newspaper away, you put it aside. The same with magazines, books, you get to the end of a chapter, prompts you to consider whether you want to continue. You watched a show on TV, eventually the show would end and then you'd have a week until the next one came. So there were stopping cues everywhere. But the way we consume media today is such that there are no stopping cues. The newsfeed just rolls on, and everything's bottomless. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, email, text messaging, the news, and when you do check all sorts of other sources, you can just keep going on and on and on. So we can get a cue about what to do